Winning a war is one thing. Building a government that can hold a free people together without sliding into chaos on the one side or tyranny on the other is harder. And the founders' first attempt at it failed. What they built on the second attempt is the most carefully thought out frame of government any nation has ever written down. And it was built on a clear-eyed and frankly biblical idea of what a human being actually is. That is, tonight.
Well, hello again and come on in. I'm Grandma Rita.
And I'm Papa. Glad you're back at the table with us.
Last time was what it cost to make the promise real. The war and the long price after.
Tonight is what they built with it. They had won their freedom. Now they had to govern it without losing it. And their first attempt fell apart. So tonight is the second attempt, the Constitution.
Same rule as always?
Same rule. Glad for it. Honest about it. Though I will tell you, this is the chapter where I get to brag a little, because what they built is genuinely remarkable.
Then show us.
The first national government, under the Articles of Confederation, was deliberately feeble. For a people who had just fought a long war to throw off an overbearing power were in no mood to raise up a strong one of their own. So they built a government that could barely govern. It could not tax, could not regulate trade among the states, and could not enforce its own decisions. The states behaved like 13 small countries, printing their own money and taxing one another's goods, and thoughtful men began to fear that the liberty so dearly bought was dissolving into disorder. Then came a warning that could not be ignored. Debt-burdened farmers in western Massachusetts, many of them veterans of the Revolution facing the loss of their farms, rose in armed revolt and shut down the courts. And the national government had no force of its own to send against them. The shock traveled through every state. A government too weak to keep order, men realized, is as dangerous to liberty as one too strong. Because where lawful authority cannot act, disorder fills the gap. And frightened people have always been willing to trade their freedom for the promise of order. So in the summer of 1787, delegates gathered in Philadelphia, shut the windows against eavesdroppers and the heat, and built a new government from the foundation up. Their central problem was how to give it enough power to function and enough limits to stay free. Their answers were three, and they worked together. Federalism divided power between the nation and the states, so that no single government held all of it. The separation of powers split the national government into three branches, each with its own work, and a system of checks and balances armed each branch to restrain the others, so that the ambition of one office would be set against the ambition of the next.
So in a way, they were afraid of their own government.
They had just fought a war against too much power. So they built a machine that assumes the worst about the people who will run it and chains them ahead of time. Power split three ways, each branch armed to check the others. Ambition set against ambition. They did not trust the men who would hold the offices, so they built the trust into the structure instead of into the men. Here is the part most people have never been taught, and it is at the heart of what the founders built. The power they feared most wore two faces, and they guarded against both. One was the old danger they had just fought a war over, a king or any single ruler holding power without account. The other was newer and harder to say aloud in a country that had just appealed to the people against a crown, the danger of an unchecked majority, a temporary popular passion turned against a minority with no law standing in its way. For this reason, the founders did not build a pure democracy, where the assembled people decide every question by a raw count of hands. They built a republic, where the people govern through elected representatives, and under a written law that stands above the wish of any momentary majority. This was a deliberate choice, not an accident, and the founders said so plainly. They had studied the direct democracies of the ancient world, and did not like how they ended. John Adams put the worry bluntly: democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. When the convention finished its work, and a citizen asked Benjamin Franklin what kind of government they had given the country, the answer that has come down to us was a warning as much as a description: a republic, if you can keep it. The Constitution wrote the choice into its own text, guaranteeing to every state a republican form of government, and building a Senate where every state stands equal, so that sheer numbers would not carry every question. The founders bounded the power of the majority for exactly the same reason they bounded the power of a king. They did not trust unchecked power in anyone's hands, the people's included, because they did not trust the human heart, their own included. The heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can know it? Jeremiah 17:9. James Madison said the same thing in plainer political words when he defended the new design. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Men are not angels, and the men who govern are no exception. So the structure was built to assume the worst about the people who would fill its offices, and to chain them in advance. The whole machine is not arbitrary cleverness. It is a response to the fall, an effort to make a safe government out of unsafe materials.
And it wasn't only a king they were afraid of. It was a crowd.
That is the part most folks were never taught. They feared an unchecked majority every bit as much as an unchecked king. A passing passion of the people turned against a minority with no law standing in the way. So they did not build a pure democracy. They built a republic under a written law that stands above any crowd's wish. Franklin said it plain: a republic, if you can keep it.
Why bound the people, too?
Same reason they bound the king. They did not trust unchecked power in anybody's hands, the people's included, because they did not trust the human heart, their own included. The heart is deceitful, the prophet said, and desperately sick. Madison put it in plainer words: if men were angels, no government would be necessary. The whole machine is a response to the fall. Scripture had taught the deepest principle of the Constitution long before Philadelphia. Even Israel's king, the highest power in the land, was commanded to live under a written law he had not made and could not revise. And it shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear Yahweh his God, to carefully observe all the words of this law and these statutes. Deuteronomy 17:19. The danger the passage names is exactly the danger the founders feared: a ruler whose heart is lifted up above the people he governs, who comes to believe the law is beneath him. A constitution that places every official, the president as fully as the humblest clerk, under a written law none of them can escape, is built on that very idea. And notice that this does not despise authority. Scripture affirms that governing authority comes from God and is to be honored. The founders did not reject authority, they bounded it. Power is real and God-given, and precisely because it answers to God, it must never be made absolute in the hands of men. 3 convictions are planted here, like seeds, and they are worth saying simply, because a free people has to keep them alive on its own. The first is that legitimate law is not whatever the powerful decide it is. It derives from a higher authority, the law of nature and of nature's God, and a command that breaks that higher law has no true authority, however official it looks. The second is that those who hold office are bound under the supreme law, not standing above it, and the day they treat the law as theirs to remake at will is the day the chain has slipped. The third is the oldest and the most easily forgotten. A free government cannot run on machinery alone. It needs citizens who are virtuous and watchful, who know what the law is meant to do, and will hold their own rulers to it. When the righteous increase, the people are glad, but when a wicked man rules, people groan. Proverbs 29:2. A people will sometimes be governed by the righteous and sometimes by the wicked, and no constitution can guarantee which. What a good constitution can do is limit the harm a wicked ruler may inflict and order the good a righteous one accomplishes. That is precisely what this one set out to do, and it has outlasted every other written national constitution on earth. One liberty the new structure secured deserves special notice because it healed a wound the colonies had carried from their first generation. The Pilgrims and Puritans had crossed an ocean for freedom of conscience, and then, once they held power, denied that same freedom to the dissenters among them. The founding corrected the failure. The First Amendment forbade Congress to establish a national church or to prohibit the free exercise of religion, and so the conscience the Puritans had claimed only for themselves was secured in the nation's supreme law for everyone. A government barred from dictating a man's worship had finally learned the lesson conscience had been teaching since Plymouth, that the soul answers to God, and the state must not stand between them.
And the deepest part of it, Scripture had taught long before Philadelphia.
Even Israel's king had to live under a written law he had not made and could not revise, a law above the rulers. That is the seed. And here is the thing about a seed. A free people has to keep it alive on its own. The structure can limit the harm a wicked ruler does, and order the good a righteous one accomplishes, but it cannot run on machinery alone. It needs citizens who are virtuous and watchful, who know what the law is for, and will hold their own rulers to it.
Which is the whole reason we teach the way we do.
That is it exactly. Washington said it on his way out of office. Religion and morality are indispensable supports. A people who fear no God will, in time, fear no law. They built the frame, but keeping it rests on something they knew they could not manufacture and could only hope each new generation would receive. A constitution on paper is only a hope until someone proves it can work, and the first proof was George Washington. Almost everything he did set a precedent, because there was nothing before him. The most remarkable thing he did was the simplest. A general who had commanded a victorious army, and then a president who could likely have held office for life, gave the power back. He served and then went home. Set that against the long record of history, where victorious generals seize power and keep it, and Washington stands out sharply. He was no flawless hero, and it would dishonor the truth to make him one. He held more than 100 men, women, and children in slavery on the very estate to which he so famously retired, and the freedom he secured for his countrymen he did not extend to them, though he came at the last to trouble over it and ordered them freed in his will. What can be honored without flattery is not the whole man, but the precise thing he did with power, which was to let it go. As he left office, he warned the country in a farewell address read aloud for generations about the deepest support of the whole experiment. Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, he wrote, religion and morality are indispensable supports. He was naming what the founders generally believed, but did not always say plainly. Free government cannot sustain itself on mechanism alone. A people who fear no God will eventually fear no law. The ordered liberty the Constitution built rests, in the end, on a moral foundation its architects knew they could not manufacture themselves, and could only hope each new generation would receive. Original sin, then, may be defined a hereditary corruption and depravity of our nature, extending to all the parts of the soul, which first makes us obnoxious to the wrath of God, and then produces in us works which in Scripture are termed works of the flesh. John Calvin, Institutes of the Christian Religion. This is the conviction beneath the whole machinery of checks and balances. If corruption reaches every part of every person, then no one and no office can be safely trusted with power left unguarded, and a government built to assume the best of its rulers is a government waiting to be betrayed. The framers built for the truth Scripture had stated plainly since the days of Noah. Then Yahweh saw that the evil of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Genesis 6:5.
A safe government built out of unsafe materials.
Out of people like us. That is not cynicism. That is honesty, and it is the reason the thing has held.
The chapter closes on an old hymn written in 1729 that bows the heart low before the one under whom all authority stands. We will leave you with its opening.
Lo, God is here. Let us adore and own how dreadful is this place. Let all within us feel his power and silent bow before his face. Who know his power, his grace who prove, serve him with awe, with reverence, love. That is what they built. Next time, where it has come 250 years on, and what it asks of us now.
If an education that holds faith and history together is what you want for your children or grandchildren, that is GraceHaven Academy. First link in the description.
And right under it, the booklet, free like always. Read it on the site or sign up and we'll send the download to your inbox and keep you posted as the rest comes out before the 4th.
Read it slow and read it together.
Thank you for sitting with us. We're glad you were here.